The gate closed at 11:58 p.m. on a Saturday in October. Bisi Nwosu heard the lock engage from the other side. A single metallic click she had heard every night for 9 years, when she was the one closing it from inside. She stood on the pavement on Bordeaux Road in Ikoyi, with a single Ghana must-go bag at her feet and a white envelope on top of the bag, and the kind of quiet around her that only exists on that street at that hour. When the big houses have pulled their curtains and the generators have settled into their low nighttime hum, and the only thing moving is the security light above the gate she had just been removed from. The envelope contained 180,000 naira in used notes and a single typed sentence on Chamberlain Holdings' letterhead: "Payment in lieu of notice, with thanks for 9 years of service." No signature. Bisi had looked at the sentence twice and understood that it had been written by someone in the office who had never met her, and that the man who should have signed it had not been in the room when it was prepared. She did not open the envelope again. She picked up the bag, which weighed 11 kilograms and contained everything she owned that had fit when she was given 40 minutes to pack, and she walked toward the junction at the end of Bordeaux Road, where the streetlight was stronger, and where, at midnight on a Saturday, there was still the occasional car moving toward the bridge. What Chief Emeka Chamberlain did not know, what he had not considered in the 4 minutes it took him to instruct his personal assistant to prepare Bisi's severance while Adaeze, his new wife, stood in the kitchen doorway watching, was that Bisi Nwosu had been listening to his business conversations for 9 years. Not from curiosity, not from any plan, but because the house was not large enough for a woman doing her work to be entirely separate from the man conducting his life. And because Emeka Chamberlain had long ago stopped seeing Bisi as someone who could understand what she was hearing. That was his first mistake. The second one would take 11 months to fully understand. Bisi Adunola Nwosu was 38 years old on the night she stood on Bordeaux Road. She was 1.62 meters tall and weighed 61 kilograms, and had a way of standing that her mother had drilled into her from childhood. Straight, shoulders back. Not as performance, but as the opposite of permission. The posture of a woman who had decided, very early, not to make herself smaller to fit into other people's spaces. She wore a gray cotton dress with short sleeves that she had bought at Balagoon Market 2 years earlier for 2,500 naira, and washed so many times it had gone soft in a way that expensive fabric never did. The dress was clean. Her shoes were flat black sandals with a small tear on the left strap she had mended with a needle and black thread 6 months ago, in a stitch so neat you had to look for it to find it. She carried no jewelry except a single bead bracelet on her right wrist, 7 red and black beads on an elastic cord that her grandmother had pressed into her palm in Abeokuta the last time Bisi visited before she died. Her grandmother had not explained the bracelet. She had said only, "Wear it until you don't need it." Bisi had worn it for 14 years. She had not yet decided whether she had reached the not needing. She had grown up the second of 4 children in a house in Abeokuta, where her father repaired shoes on a wooden bench outside, and her mother sold akara on a tray from 5 to 10 every morning. There was not enough of anything to produce comfort, but there was enough of discipline to produce competence. Bisi could cook for 40 people from ingredients assembled that morning. She could manage a household budget the way her mother managed the akara proceeds, by knowing exactly what every item cost, exactly what was left, and exactly which corners could not be cut without producing something nobody would want to eat. She had come to Lagos at 21 with 1 bag, a contact number scrawled on a piece of paper, and a clear-eyed understanding that the city would offer nothing freely, and that the only question was what she was willing to do to earn what she needed. She had worked for 2 families before Chamberlain, the first for 3 years, the second for 2. With Chief Emeka Chamberlain she had lasted 9, which in the domestic work economy of Ikoyi was less a tenure than a record. She had cooked his meals and managed his house staff and organized his kitchen accounts, and kept the kind of order in a home that allows a man to walk through every room of his life without ever being interrupted by the logistics of it. She had known the name and schedule of every person who came through that gate. She had known which suppliers to call and which to avoid, and the exact price at which the wrong vendor would start padding the bills. She had the phone numbers of the plumber, the electrician, the generator service man, the gateman's replacement contact, the pediatrician's emergency line from when Emeka's son from his first marriage had been living in the house for 2 years, and the direct number for the woman at the governor's liaison office who needed to be called whenever there was an event that required road closure approvals. None of this was written down. It lived in Bisi, the way the columns lived in Adesua, the way some knowledge refuses to sit on paper and insists instead on a person. At the junction at the end of Bourdion Road she found a Keke Napep whose driver was awake and reading his phone under the streetlight. She told him Surulere. He said it was far. She said she knew. He named a price. She named a different one. They agreed on something between them. She put the bag in the back, sat beside it, and did not speak for the 35 minutes it took to cross the bridge, and reach the street in Surulere where her cousin Felicia lived in a 2-room apartment on the 2nd floor of a building whose external staircase had a handrail Bisi had last grabbed 6 years ago when she visited. For a naming ceremony, Felicia opened the door at midnight in a wrapper and a look on her face that asked a full question without using a single word. Bisi said, "I'll explain in the morning." Felicia took the bag from her. She said, "There is rice from this evening." Bisi said, "I'll eat in the morning." She lay down on the sofa with a thin blanket Felicia brought without being asked, and listened to the sounds of Surulere at 1 a.m. A generator somewhere close. A baby 2 apartments over. The particular quality of traffic noise that a bridge neighborhood makes when it never fully sleeps. She was not sleeping. She was doing what she had done on every difficult night she could remember, which was count what she had instead of what she didn't. What she had, 180,000 naira in the envelope. A phone with 47 contacts who knew her name and knew she did what she said she would do. A brain that held 9 years of information about how a certain type of Lagos business conducted itself from the inside. And one other thing. One thing that had been sitting in the back of her mind for 3 years and that she had never done anything with because while she was inside that gate there was no reason and no room. The thing was this. She knew exactly where Chamberlain Holdings was bleeding, not because she had been looking, because she had been listening, and because 9 years of preparing dinner for a man who conducted phone calls at the dining table while she was setting plates meant she had heard, in pieces, across time, without any one conversation being complete. Enough of the picture to understand where the frame was broken. The procurement department was the frame. She had heard 3 conversations over 14 months about a supplier named Goldline Materials, who was billing at rates that made no sense against the volume. She had heard Emeka himself, twice, say the word discrepancy, and then not say it again. She had heard his operations director, a man named Gerald Nwofor, who came to the house on the first Sunday of every month, tell Emeka in October of the previous year that the audit firm they used was not asking the right questions. Emeka had said he would change firms. He had not changed firms. Bisi knew he had not changed firms because Gerald had repeated the same sentence, almost word for word, the following March. She lay on Felicia's sofa and thought about Goldline Materials. Then, she slept. In the morning, Felicia made ogi and akara and sat across from BC at the kitchen table and listened. She did not interrupt. When BC finished, Felicia was quiet for a moment and then said, "So what are you going to do?" BC said, "I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago." Felicia said, "Which is what?" BC said, "Start." If this story is already making something move in you, subscribe now. Because what BC does with 180,000 naira and 9 years of the right information is something Emeka Chamberlain's entire board didn't see coming. She spent the first week in Surulere making a list. Not a wish list, a work list. Names she knew. Numbers she had. Knowledge she carried that had a market value if she took it to the right market. She wrote it in a notebook she bought from a stationary kiosk near Felicia's building for 350 naira. A lined notebook with a blue cover she pressed flat on the kitchen table the first morning, as though preparing it for something important. The first call she made was to a woman named Mama Tinu, who sold building materials from a yard in Mushin, and who had supplied one of BC's previous employers, and whose number BC had carried in her phone for 7 years without occasion to use it. She told Mama Tinu she was looking for a supplier connection. Mama Tinu, who had survived Lagos long enough to ask no unnecessary questions, said, "Come on Wednesday." The second call was to a man named Kolade Adeyemi, who had done the electrical work at the Bourdion house twice, and who had given BC his card both times because she was the person who managed the access and the timing and the payment. She told Kolade she was starting a facilities management company and needed a reliable electrical contractor. Kolade said, "Madam, I have been waiting for you to call me for 6 years." The third call was to a procurement consultant named Chukwemeka Achebe, who advertised in a WhatsApp group BC had been quietly in for 4 years, a group for domestic staff and household managers that discussed supply costs, contractor reliability, and which employers were worth working for. Chukwemeka was not in the group for social reasons. He was there for the same reason BC was, because the people in that group knew more about the actual running costs of Lagos households and businesses than any consultant spreadsheet could record. She told him she wanted to discuss a business idea. He asked for a meeting. They met on a Friday at a buka on Western Avenue. Chukwemeka was 44, wore glasses with a cracked left lens he had wrapped with tape, and spoke in a low, precise voice that suggested he had learned early that volume was not the same as authority. He drank Fanta and listened to BC for 22 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "The procurement angle is the correct angle. The question is entry." BC said, "I have the entry." He looked at her. She told him about Gold Line materials, not everything. Enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How confident are you?" She said, "I was in that house for 9 years." He said, "When do you want to start?" She registered the company in the 4th week. Chukwemeka knew the CAC process, handled the paperwork, and reduced the bureaucratic surface area of it to a series of specific steps with specific costs that BC paid from the envelope in exact amounts she tracked in the blue notebook. The name she registered was Eek Services Limited and Wosu Akebe Consulting. 2 names, equal shares. Akebe had proposed different split arrangements twice. She had said 50-50 or nothing each time. Not because she was rigid, but because she understood, from 9 years of watching how men organize things in their own favor when women let them, that the structure at the beginning is the structure you live in forever. The remaining capital after registration and first-month operating costs was 94,000 naira. Not enough for offices, sufficient for a phone line, a professional email, a one-page website Felice's boyfriend designed for 15,000 naira, and the kind of presentation document that tells a potential client you know what you are doing before they have heard a word you say. Their first client meeting was with a property management company in Lekki, whose CEO had been introduced to Chukwuemeka by a mutual contact. The meeting was a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. BC arrived wearing a navy suit jacket she had bought second-hand from a boutique in Oyodu for 4,200 naira and pressed the night before. She presented the EEC methodology, an internal procurement audit, examining billing rates against market rates for key supplier categories, identifying variance, tracing the variance to its source, and producing a report with corrective recommendations. She quoted a fee. The CEO looked at Chukwuemeka. Chukwuemeka looked at the presentation. The CEO said, "When can you start?" She said, "Monday." They started on Monday. The audit took 3 weeks. The variance they found was 2.3 million naira in overpriced service contracts across 2 supplier relationships. The report was 31 pages. The CEO read it in one sitting on a Thursday and made 2 calls during the reading and 1 call immediately after. The contract was resolved within 6 weeks. EEC received their fee and a referral letter the CEO wrote himself, by hand, on company letterhead. The referral letter generated 2 more clients. Those 2 generated 3 more. By the 5th month, EEC Services had 6 active engagements and a waitlist of 2. BC had moved from Felice's sofa into a single room in a cleaner building 2 streets away. That cost her 45,000 naira for 6 months. She bought a proper desk. She bought a printer. She subscribed to a legal database Chukwuemeka identified that provided access to regulatory filings she could cross-reference against client-supplier claims. In the 7th month, a name came across their desk. Not Chamberlain Holdings. A subsidiary, a company called Meridian Procurement Services Ltd., registered as a third-party purchasing agent, connected to several construction and property development companies. It was on a list of suppliers BC had been maintaining as a secondary research document, names that appeared across multiple client audits. A pattern she had been tracking for 4 months without discussing it with anyone, because the pattern was not yet a picture, and she did not want to name a picture she could not yet see fully. Meridian Procurement Services Ltd. appeared in 3 separate client audits. In 2 of the 3 it appeared as a billing intermediary, a company that sat between the actual supplier and the client, and took a margin that was not disclosed to the client as a margin, but embedded in the supplier quote. In the 3rd audit, the billing pattern was different, but the contact name on the Meridian invoices was the same: G. Mofor. Gerald Nwofor. Operations Director, first Sunday of every month. Discrepancy. Audit firm not asking the right questions. BC sat at her desk on a Wednesday evening with the windows open and the sounds of the neighborhood coming in, and looked at the 3 invoice sets in front of her for 40 minutes. Then she opened the blue notebook, which by now had 38 pages of notes in her handwriting, and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. She did not call Chukwuemeka that night. She wanted to be certain before she said it aloud, because she had learned from 9 years in a household where men spoke before they were certain that the quality of a statement depended entirely on whether the person making it had checked every corner before opening their mouth. She spent the next 11 days checking every corner. What she found, documented across 6 supplier relationships, 4 corporate registry filings, and 2 sets of invoices she was able to obtain through a contact at one of the affected companies, was a systematic billing scheme that had been running for at least 4 years. Meridian Procurement Services Limited, registered in Chukwuemeka's database to a director whose address matched a residential property in Aja, had been inserting itself as a procurement intermediary in transactions where it added no visible service and extracted a margin of between 11 and 19%, embedded in inflated supplier quotes, spread across enough suppliers to resist easy pattern recognition. The scheme had one structural weakness. It had been running in the same companies for long enough that a lateral comparison of billing rates across those companies, something none of their individual auditors had thought to do, produced a pattern so consistent it could not be coincidence. BC's report was 64 pages. She gave Chukwuemeka 48 hours to review it. He called her on the second evening and said only, "BC." She said, "I know." He said, "How far do you want to take this?" She said, "All the way." He said, "Then we need to take it somewhere that will listen." They took it to two places simultaneously. The first was a financial crimes attorney named Adayeze Okafor, who operated from a building in Marina and who had been referred to Chukwuemeka by the legal database subscription. The second was a business journalist named Emeka Osayi at a newspaper whose business desk had broken 3 corporate fraud stories in the past 2 years. They shared the report with both under non-disclosure agreements that Adayese drafted and both parties signed before seeing the first page. Adayese said the matter was criminal in character and advised filing with the relevant regulatory body with a civil recovery claim attached. Osayi said nothing for a long time after reading. Then he said, "Do you understand what you have here?" BC said, "Yes." He said, "This is a significant matter." She said, "I know." He asked if she was prepared for what happened after it was published. She thought about a gate closing on Bourdieu Road at 11:58 p.m. on a Saturday. She said, "I have been preparing for a year. The regulatory filing was made on a Thursday. The story ran the following Monday. By Wednesday, Chamberlain Holdings had suspended Gerald Nuafor pending investigation. By the following Monday, the board had commissioned an independent forensic audit. Within 6 weeks, the forensic audit had confirmed and expanded the EEC findings. The full scope was larger than BC had documented. The recoverable amount across the affected companies exceeded 470 million naira. Gerald Nuafor's engagement with Chamberlain Holdings was terminated. 3 other companies involved quietly restructured their procurement departments. Meridian Procurement Services Ltd. was dissolved. The director in Aja was the subject of a separate legal process BC was not party to and did not track. Chamberlain Holdings Board contacted EEC Services Limited 6 weeks after the forensic audit was completed. Not Emeka himself. The board's chairwoman, a retired banker named Constance Mensah, who wore her gray haircut very short, and who asked questions in the specific way of a person who had learned that the quality of your questions was a more accurate signal of competence than the quality of your answers. She met BC in a conference room at the Chamberlain Holdings head office on Lagos Island. BC arrived 4 minutes early. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her back straight in the way her mother had drilled into her in Abeokuta and waited. Constance Mensah arrived exactly on time, sat across from her, and said, "Tell me how you found it." BC told her, all of it, including where she had heard the first thread of it, including what that meant about where she had been for 9 years and why she had been removed. Constance Mensah listened without a change in expression. When BC finished, there was a silence that lasted approximately 15 seconds. Then Constance said, "Emeka did not know what he was putting out of the gate." BC said, "No." Constance said, "He knows now." BC said nothing. Constance looked at her for a moment longer, and then slid a document across the table. It was a contract. A 2-year engagement for Eek Services Limited to serve as Chamberlain Holdings' internal procurement verification partner at a retainer that made the number at the top of the page require a second look. BC read it twice. She looked at the retainer figure once more. She said, "I'll have my lawyer review this." Constance said, "Of course." She paused. Then she said, "For what it is worth, and I do not speak for Emeka in this, what was done was wrong." BC said, "What was done put me in the right room at the right time. That is all I needed to have done." She signed the contract on a Friday. Chukwuemeka was in the room. He did not speak during the meeting. When they left the building and stood on the pavement on Lagos Island in the afternoon heat, he looked at the copy of the contract in his hand and said, 9 years. She said, 9 years. He shook his head slowly. She said, "Come, there is somewhere I want to go." She took him to a buka in Surulere. Not the one on Western Avenue where they had first met, a different one, 2 streets from Felicia's building, where a woman named Mama Kike had been selling jollof rice from a coal pot since 1998. BC had been coming here for 11 months. She ordered 2 plates and sat across from Chukwuemeka and ate in the way she had been eating for a year. Without rush, without waste, with the full attention a meal deserves when you know what it cost. The bracelet was on her wrist. 7 red and black beads. She looked at it while she was eating and thought about her grandmother's voice and the instructions she had given. Wear it until you don't need it. She finished eating. She looked at the bracelet for one more moment. Then she left it on. She was not done. There are things that look like endings that are only the place where the real work begins. A gate closing at midnight. A typed sentence on letterhead with no signature. A bag of belongings weighed in the back of a keke at 12:30 on Bourdian Road. You can remove a person from your house. You cannot remove from them what they learned while they were in it. You cannot file a severance document for knowledge. You cannot change the lock on what a person carries in their own mind. Some people have been listening so carefully and for so long that the moment you stop needing them is the exact moment they become dangerous. Not to you specifically, but to every wall of protection you built that should not have been there in the first place. BC did not destroy Emeka Chamberlain. She found what was destroying him and named it and documented it and handed it to people who had the authority to remove it. That is not revenge. That is work. And the difference between those two things is everything. If someone handed you everything they knew about your business and asked for nothing back, would you see it as a threat or a gift? And if a person who once cleaned your kitchen became the person reviewing your accounts, would you be ashamed or grateful? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.